It's the appointed time. I call to order the meeting of the panel on housing right on the dot. We have in attendance Ms. Winnie Ho, Secretary for Housing, Ms. Rosanna Law, Permanent Secretary for Housing or Director of Housing, Mr. Donald Deputy Secretary for Housing, Deputy Director, Strategy Housing Department, Ms. Cherry Young, Assistant Director, Strategic Planning Housing Department, Mr. Leo Yu, Commissioner for Census and Statistics, Ms. Frida Tong, Senior Statistician, Social 2 Census and Statistics Department. Agenda item number 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. Since the last meeting, the Secretary has received some information papers and the details of which have been set out in the agenda. Agenda item number 2, items for discussion at the next meeting. The regular meeting in October will be held on 7th of October, Monday at 2:30 p.m. We will discuss the two following items. A. Proposed well-being design guidelines and implementation progress of pilot scheme. And B. Lift modernization program and other safety enhancement measures for lifts in public rental housing estates of the Hong Kong Housing Authority. These are the two proposed items for discussion. Members, any views on the arrangements for the meeting? None? We'll move on to agenda item number 3. I welcome all public officers in attendance. I will now invite the Secretary to brief members on the paper on 2024 rent review of public rental housing. Thank you, Chair. The Housing Authority's policy is to make sure the rent is at a reasonable and affordable level for tenants. Section 16A of the Housing Ordinance stipulates the public rental housing rent adjustment mechanism. The ordinance came into effect on 1st of January 2008, and the Hong Kong Housing Authority shall conduct a rent review in accordance with the section. And a rent review should be conducted every 2 years and vary the rent as soon as practicable. Basically, the rent review should have reference to the change in income index between the first and second periods covered by the review. The data will be compiled by the Commissioner for Census and Statistics. The rent can either increase or decrease. For the increase, a cap of 10% will be imposed. If it is a decrease, no floor is imposed. It is shown in the relevant percentage in the change in income index would be 10.73% because there is a cap of the increase being at 10%. The proposed rent adjustment will be 10%. So basically, the range of monthly rent increase ranges from $49 to $572. The Hong Kong Housing Authority also has the power to provide rent concessions if necessary, in accordance with the law. For the 2024 rent review, excluding the CSA households amounting approximately 100,000, the increase of monthly rent would be $250 or below for about 60% of the tenants. We believe the increase would be affordable. Having regard to the prevailing social economic circumstances, the extent of the rent increase impact on the PRH tenants and Hong Kong Housing Authority's financial transition. We propose by means of a one-off measure provide a special concessionary measure to tenants by waiving the extra rent payable by the tenants each month due to the rent adjustment in the first 3 months following the rent adjustment. We consider that the well-off tenants should be able to afford the current rent adjustment. In order to ensure the rational use of the HA's financial resources, we do not recommend including well-off tenants in the special concessionary measure. In due course, we will submit to the Subsidized Housing Committee to consider the outcome of the rent review in the meeting on 19th of July 2024. If the proposed increase is passed by the committee, the proposal will come into operation on 1st of October 2024. Now, my colleague, Ms. Cherry Young, will give a presentation on the details of the rent review, and views expressed by members today will be passed on to the Subsidized Housing Committee for its consideration at its meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Well, it's now time for members to ask questions. Ms. Cherry Young will now give a presentation. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I will now present the information in relation to the rent review. As the Secretary said, the housing ordinance stipulates a rent adjustment mechanism that a review should be conducted every 2 years, and the rent is to be varied according to the change in the income index between the first and second periods covered by the review. If the income index for the second period is higher than that for the first period by more than 0.1%, the rent should be increased by the rate of the increase of the income index, or 10%, whichever is less. And if the relevant income index for the second period is lower than that for the first period by more than 0.1%, the rent is to be reduced by the rate of reduction of the income index, and there's no floor imposed. So for the first period, it would be the 12 months in 2021, and the second period would be the 12 months of 2023. We have made reference to the relevant actual distribution of household size each month when we made a monthly sampling of 2,000 PRH households for the first and second periods. We want to exclude income deviation, so we have excluded 3 types of households. That is, well-off tenants, other households with high outlying income, and CSA households. And the data, as said earlier, are to be compiled by the Commissioner for Census and Statistics. So the outcome of the review is that the average income in the first period is $24,094, and the index is set at 100. The adjusted mean monthly household income in the second period, 2023, is $26,679. The index of the second period is therefore 110.73. As I said earlier, because there is a cap of 10%, the proposed adjustment is plus 10%. Now, on impact of rent adjustment on tenants. The average increase of monthly rent would be $230 per month, and it would range from $49 to $572. We have a total of about 807,800 households residing in PRH as at March 2024. Among them, about 80% were paying normal rent. About 13% were CSSA households whose rent was covered by the government. About 4% were well-off tenants who were paying additional rent, and about 3% were receiving assistance under HA's rent assistance scheme. And as the Secretary said earlier, about 60% of the tenants have a monthly rent increase of $250 or below. So you can see here the number of households in each category. Basically, over 62%, that is for the first 4 groups, they would have a monthly rent increase of $250 or below. So since 2007, when the rent adjustment mechanism was stipulated, we had a starting point of minus 11.6%. Every 2 years after that, we would conduct a review. As you may see here in 2012, 2014, 2016, and 2018, for the 4 reviews, we had an increase of 10%. But back then, the income index would range from 16% to 19% of increase. This is because there is a cap of 10%. So in these years, we only had an adjustment of plus 10%. And you can see here, the income has increased for 113%. But then you can see in the blue line here, the cumulative increase in PRH rent is just 87%, as shown by the blue line. So you can see that the cumulative increase in household income would be higher than the cumulative increase in PRH rent. The ratio of average PRH rent to the average PRH household income has gradually decreased from 9.97% in 2007 to 9.70% after the rent increase in accordance with the current review. It shows that we have achieved somewhat our original policy intent. It provides an objective and affordable measurement of the rent to be paid by tenants. Well, it is also announced in the 2024-25 budget that we would have rates concessions subject to a ceiling of $1,000 for each rateable property. In line with established practice, we will pass on the rates concession to tenants, and the rates concession receivable by each household ranges from about $170 to $1,000 in 2024 to 25. We also have a rent assistance scheme, RAS, under the Housing Authority to help tenants with temporary financial difficulties. Depending on the level of their income, eligible applicants will be granted either 25% or 50% rent reduction for a period of 2 years. As at end March 2024, about 22,400 households are receiving rent reduction, and 96% of them are receiving a 50% rent reduction. Having regard to the socio-economic circumstances, the extent of rent increase impact on the tenants and HA's financial position, we propose by means of a one-off measure, a special concessionary measure to tenants by waiving the extra rent payable by the tenants each month due to the rent adjustment in the first 3 months following the rent adjustment. We do not recommend including well-off tenants in the special concessionary measure because the well-off tenants should be able to afford the current rent adjustment. We will make a further submission to the SHC for consideration. If it is passed, the proposal will come into operation on 1st of October. Now, with the financial implications, it is estimated that in the rental housing operating account, we will have a deficit of about $1.167 billion in 2024-25 and a deficit of about $2.143 billion in 2025-26. Even with the 10% increase, the rental housing operating account will still have a deficit of about $16 million, but we will have an operating surplus of $185 million in 2025-26. With the special concessionary measure, the rental income foregone in 2024-25 will be about $575 million. That's it for my report, Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Director. The floor is now open for members to raise questions. Let me read out the names of the members who would like to raise questions. The first one, Lau Kok-fun, followed by Yang Wing-kiet, Li Zhenkiang, Dr. Wendy Hong, Kwok Wai-keung, Andrew Lam, Leung Kwong, Carmen Khan, So Chung-wing. So the floor is now given to Mr. Lau Kok-fun. Thank you, Chairman. We have heard from the Permanent Secretary and the Secretary herself the reasons why there's a rent adjustment. Well, the cost of PRH construction has also risen, but we have to consider that PRH tenants are grassroots people, and every now and then we have heard news about price increases across different fields, and inflation is on the rise. Would the administration, in considering affordability, the inflation situation in the adjustment mechanism? Second, on the sampling of income survey for the first and second periods in question, depending on the distribution of tenants, you would survey a sample of 2,000 tenants. Every 2 years, PRH tenants have to declare their assets, etc. And the Permanent Secretary has been working hard on this matter recently. So since it's done once every 2 years, the Housing Authority is fully aware of the tenants' household income and assets. So there will be no need to have an additional sampling survey. You can use the big data and then compute the rate of adjustment, rent adjustment. So is it really necessary to continue with this sampling survey? And also grassroots people will be affected by rent increase, any rent increase. And the concessionary measures proposed will not cover well-off tenants, which I agree. If tenants are adversely affected by the rent increase, they can apply for assistance under the rent assistance scheme. But not many PRH tenants are aware of this scheme. Very often, they will only know this when they approach our ward offices for assistance, and then they would submit an application to HA. So perhaps in terms of publicity, when you announce the rent increase, you should inform the tenants that there is such a rent assistance scheme to help tenants who are severely affected, so that they are aware of this relief measure. All right, 4 minutes for each member, questions and answers included. I will provide some succinct replies to the questions raised by the members. We know that rent PRH tenants are grassroots people. Therefore, we want to make sure that rents are affordable. So this mechanism does contain a cap when there's an increase, but for rent deduction or reduction. There's no such cap. If we look at the data since 2008, the rent to income ratio is 9.97 in the previous period and now 9.7%. So there's a slight decrease in fact. And also for the concessionary measure we propose, we would take away well-off tenants so that well-off tenants will have to pay the new rent from the 1st of October. But for CSSA households, their rent is paid by government. And also when we co-organize activities with NGOs, we will publicize the fact that there's such a rent assistance scheme to tenants. And our managers in the estates are also very helpful. When people approach them for consultation, they will inform the tenants of the rent assistance scheme. And also through a discussion here, I hope more people will know that there is such a scheme to help them. We'll certainly do more publicity. As for the sampling size, it's 2,000 households per month. We look at the income, if, for example, the declaration of bonus, etc. As for the other declaration measure to require tenants to declare the assets, such as property ownership. So that's not what we would cover under the sampling survey. Mr. Yang Wing-Kit. Well, there's not much we can say about the rent adjustment because this is done under Section 16A of the Housing Ordinance. Is 10%. And now there will be a relief or grace period of 3 months. So that's good, but can we also offer some additional comments? Well, the mechanism was put in place many years ago, since 2008. And usually there will be some concessionary measures for different periods. If the mechanism works really well, there's no need to provide additional concessionary measures. And I'm not counting the government's initiative to provide a month's rent or 2 months' rent on their behalf. So we need to look at the mechanism as stipulated in the housing ordinance to see if we can do something to make it better. I can talk about some statistics. It's 9.7%, the ratio. That's not bad. But if we also consider inflation since 2007 to 2023, it's cumulatively speaking 45%. From 2007 to 2023, it's 87%. And income has gone up by 131%. If we take into account inflation and income index, it's 87%. So you are earning more, and they are earning more, and they are spending more. So you need to consider affordability in that light. You have to consider inflation. And better still, you should also look at the future prospect. But this is not easy. The Financial Secretary will give us some forecasts every year. So I think you should improve the mechanism so that people will accept the result of the adjustment exercise, because I want to make sure that you really reflect people's affordability in your calculation. Well, I may say something about the 3-month grace period. Some people are saying that this was start in the next year at the start of the new year, and people will say that maybe you should provide some additional concessions so that people can enjoy the coming new year. Are you going to consider providing some optimization to the mechanism? Well, Section 16A of the ordinance stipulates the details on how we should calculate the variation of income. If we compare 2022 to 2023, 16A provides a concession depending on the exercise of rent review. We can also provide concessionary measures. So we should consider both limbs in the mechanism. 16A is about data, the general trend. But for 17A, we can consider the individual circumstances and also the HA's financial position. So maybe this is, in a way, a reply to Mr. Young's question. The concessionary measure this time would amount to a loss of income of $570 million. If we provide another 3 months of rent concession, that would add up to a total of $1.1 billion. Some members also remember the factor of inflation. We have to be careful about this. If we take into account this factor, because with inflation considered, we have to consider deflation as well. Because during the period of deflation, the decrease in income may not be in line with the rate of deflation. So you may end up in a situation whereby their income decrease, and then they have to suffer a rent increase. Section 17A afford us with flexibility to take into account the prevailing circumstances, and if the rent-to-income ratio is now kept at about 9.7%, then I believe this mechanism as it stands now really works. Mr. Lee Chan-kung, the Secretary and the Director have done a good job in combating abuse of public housing resources, and measures have achieved good results. So you have delivered. As for the rent increase, I would like to share with you my observations. I looked at on page 13 of PowerPoint. You are now having a $1.16 billion of deficit, and in the coming year, $2.143 billion. So I believe the deficit is going to be even bigger later. And under the Section 16A mechanism, you can you can increase rent by 10%, but still you have a deficit. We need to give people a sense of well-being by affording the needy public housing. You have different measures to help them, especially a rent waiver for needy tenants, which I appreciate. But how can you make up for the deficit in the coming years? Are you going to ask the public coffers to foot the bill? And also returning to Section 16A of the ordinance, since another member has proposed a review, can you provide a bigger room for the increase? For example, in respect of well-off tenants. Well-off tenants, by definition, are tenants with higher income. Can we adjust rent in accordance with the Rating Evaluation Department's rent index? instead of the mechanism under the concessionary mechanism of the HA. So perhaps in the future, there will be a 2-tier or 3-tier mechanism for rent increase so that you can implement the policy and also your income at the same time.
Secretary, thank you, Mr. Lee, for your support of our efforts. Indeed, tenancy abuse. We had hundreds of thousands of forms received for declarations, and we have seen 1,600 units being surrendered in the last exercise. We had 300 odd forms that have yet to be received. We have issued to them notices for them to move out. Mr. Lee also mentioned deficit issue. We are proposing an increase of 10%, and we do understand people's stance on concessions. If we talk about 1 month rent waiver, it will amount to rent foregone of $2.1 billion. So that is significant. And we would also need to make sure we have rent collected for parking spaces, as well as the sale of subsidized housing units. We have many housing projects in the pipeline. The additional income will be used to fund that. It is a careful balance of various factors. For well-off tenants, while they can afford it, you can see that we have taken that into consideration. Because consider they should be able to afford the current rent adjustment, we would not include them in the special concessionary measure, but will in future review the arrangements for well-off tenants. Thank you. Dr. Wendy Hong, thank you. In view of the future position, and the Housing Authority has proposed a rent adjustment of plus 10%, I agree. It is said that the deficit will be even worse, and the reserves will decrease from $70 billion to $40 billion. It is believed the reserves with a number of public housing projects in the pipeline will decrease even further. So how to make sure the authorities' work is sustainable, it is very important. In 2024-25, it will have a $1.167 billion in deficit. In 2025-26, it would be about $2.143 billion. So this is a pressing issue. In accordance with the mechanism, every 2 years a review will be conducted. The proposed adjustment for this review will be 10%, and the average monthly rent increase would range from $49 to $570. In general, it would be $250 or below. I do support, therefore, the government's proposal because I think this is affordable. Between 21 and 23, there is 2007 to 2023, the cumulative increase in household income was 131%, whereas the cumulative increase in PRH rent is only 87%. There has to be an increase in monthly rent. And in fact, the ratio of the average PRH rent to the average PRH household income has gradually decreased from 9.97% in 2007 to 9.7% after the rent increase in accordance with the current review. Again, it shows that the proposed adjustment is reasonable. If the increase is passed, we will still have a deficit of $16 million, and in fact, with the rental foregone by the special concessionary measure, the HA's rental housing operating account is still estimated to have a deficit of about $591 million in 2024-25. So I think the government's proposal is reasonable, and I express my support for the proposal. Thank you. Secretary, any reply? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wendy Hong. You have phrased it quite correctly. We are indeed trying hard to strike a balance in relation to how we have to make sure there are reserves to provide additional of 300,000 housing units. So we have to carefully consider the financial implications. Thank you. Mr. Kwok Wai Kung. Thank you. We have a rent adjustment mechanism, as many members said. There is not much room for discussion or negotiations. Considering the housing authorities deficit or just the deficit of the government in general, I understand the difficulties faced by the administration. I welcome the special concessionary measure also, so I would support the government's proposal. As there's not much I can talk about, I will perhaps focus on support to elderly persons. For CSA households, the Social Welfare Department would pay rent for them. But some elderly persons, because they are regarded as well-off tenants, they can still live in PRH units, but they are not receiving CSSA. They do not have any income now. They only have the OH living allowance. But we can see that there's only a 3% increase with OALA. So for the last few years, the cumulative increase would be less than 7%. I am concerned that due to a meager increase in OALA, the elderly persons would have to save more in order to pay the increased rent. Is there any sort of support for these elderly households? Do you have any figures on non-CSA households that consist of elderly persons? Thank you. Secretary. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your questions. For CSA households who would include non-elderly households, we have 22,400 households, and 16,000 odd of them are elderly households. They would get rent reductions. If necessary, they can apply for the rental assistance scheme. They will be entitled to a rent reduction for a period of 2 years, subject to means tests, of course. For some elderly persons that consider rent to be somewhat expensive, but then you have to understand for rent in housing estates in urban areas, it would of course be a bit more expensive than those in outlying islands. For those in urban areas, it would be $90 odd per square meter. For those on outlying islands, it would be about $50 odd per square meter. So if elderly persons consider it expensive, they can move to other accommodation in other areas that have cheaper rent. We would welcome them to consult our managers if necessary. Thank you. Mr. Abdullam. Thank you. The administration is trying to make something out of nothing at the moment. I understand the difficulties faced by them. We need to consider many different factors. For the affordability of tenants, I would say that from the figures given, If we consider the CPI, housing expenditure accounts for a higher percentage of total income over time. For those living in rental housing compared to those living in non-public rental housing, they would have a lower percentage, but then the trend is also increasing. There is uncertainty for citizens, therefore. But I don't think the Housing Bureau alone can deal with this issue. The Housing Authority regarding the finances, I have noted that in relation to maintenance and management, the expenditure is also climbing. So with the 10% proposal to increase the rent, will it cover the expenditure increase in expenditure of maintenance and management? So I understand what can the administration do in future to achieve fiscal balance with such challenges. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you. The proposal has struck a balance with consideration of multiple factors. We want to make sure we can support the grassroots. We also need to make sure the operations of the HA are sustainable. Considering it is a significant expenditure for maintenance and repairs, as well as the number of public housing projects in the pipeline, we have tried to propose a reasonable figure. So say for non-housing categories, for example, commercial facilities, during the pandemic for 51 months, many concessions were given to operators. So we really have to do more to increase our revenue after the pandemic. With estate management, we have been doing certain things. For example, in the next item, we will discuss some environmental initiatives. Once we have made use of some energy-saving bulbs, we have saved some energy costs. So in future, we want to make use of technologies to enhance the quality of services provided as well as enhance efficiency. We have 308,000 units to be completed. I believe with the use of technologies, we can do better and in a more cost-efficient manner. We also have an intelligent estate management group that has been coming up with recommendations to help us do better. Thank you. Mr. Lerman Kwong. Thank you. I can see the situation faced by the administration. They are faced with many difficulties. I understand why they have proposed the percentage of rental adjustment, but we have heard views from tenants that they asked why should there be an increase of rent and why is the increase 10%? They don't even have a 10% increase in income. In fact, they have complained also that expenditure in other areas have risen much. So is there room for the administration to make adjustments? I'm not asking adjustments to be made now, but then in future, would it be possible to consider the expenditure of tenants? And we want to see that reviews are conducted more frequently for some aspects. Is it possible for us that we can use such data with the data collected in the sampling surveys? We'll know better the situation of tenants. I think perhaps we can conduct some studies in this regard. Regarding support for those in need, especially the housing authorities rent assistance scheme, it does make temporary financial support available. So 3 months income proof would have to be provided, or some would have to provide a 1-year income proof if they have unstable income. But then for those who have just moved in, they are barred from applying to the RAS. Is it possible that when the breadwinner is suddenly unable to make income, we can provide them with some rent support? Is there room for adjustment?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Leung. Well, I'm grateful to Mr. Leung for raising this question, and that is the mechanism results in an increase of 10.73%. It's for a 2-year period. It's not an annual survey. So that's very different, because usually for 1 year it's single digit. We're talking about a comparison between 2021 and 2023. In 2021, the unemployment rate was 5.2%, but in 2023, it dropped to 2.9%. So from the data collected in this exercise, we know that after the resumption of normality, some drivers, some mechanics have received an income increase by 13%. Construction mechanics, and I know that construction workers are difficult to come by. And the rate of increase in their income was 11.8%. So these are lower and middle income people. Many of them are PRH tenants. And if we look at the junior civil servants, it's a 5.7% for 1 year. So it's more or less the same as the 10.73% that we have worked out. And yet they are protected by the cap. The cap only applies for any increase, but not for any decrease. So there are many factors to consider. Apart from those ideas mooted by members, perhaps we should have a cap for both upward and downward adjustment if we are to conduct such a review to the mechanism. Ms. Carmen Can, Chairman, I support the recommendations for the 2024 rent review. First of all, it's done in accordance with the housing ordinance. Second, for the 800,000 odd PRH tenants, there are 4 categories: 80% normal tenants, 13% CSA households. Their rent is paid by government, and then they are subsidized tenants, and well-off tenants will not enjoy the concessionary measures. So I believe the government has taken into account a comprehensive range of factors. And also with the cap in place, the rent-to-income ratio for tenants is 9.7%. It's under 10%. I'm also concerned about the financial health of the HA. I have to declare my interest as a member of the HA committees. Since we have this 3-month grace period, and the rent increase would only commence in 2025. So there will be a loss of rent income of $575 million, and the deficit as a result will become $591 million. And also for the longer term, we are going to complete 308,000 PRH units. So we have to look at the viability, financial viability in the long term. The balance will come down from $70 billion in 2024 to $40.6 billion in 2028. So we have to look at the long-term financial viability. Can there be a review before 2026 to take into account more factors? For example, the operating expenditure of HA, the adoption of new technology, and also the need to pay for the construction of new PRH. The mechanism has been around for 17 years already, so maybe it's time to conduct a review. Thank you, Ms. Khan, for your comments. Ms. Khan, your concerns are also our concern. Now we have this mechanism under Section 16A, which is very objective, and then Section 17A allows us to provide concessions. So taken together, the two can achieve the purposes we aim to achieve. So there's a flexibility to offer concessions, and for this time, well-off tenants will not enjoy the concession, but the construction of PRH is an ongoing task. We have to ensure the HA is financially healthy in the long term. So we will pay close attention to the situation. Chairman, page 7, if we look at the data, the statistics, according to this mechanism, for the past 10 years or so, in 2012, it's capped at 10%. So it's a loss of 6.54%. 2014, 9.27, and then 6.11 in 2016. That's why we are now in such a financial position, because of the cumulative effect over the years. That's what I want to supplement in my observation. Dr. So Chung-Wing. Thank you, Chairman. The current term government has adopted very efficient and effective measures to speed up PRH construction, the introduction of provisional PRH, and the community must chip in to ensure that the resources are provided in a balanced manner. And that will be important to maintain the financial health of HA, because the HA's financial position affects thousands and thousands of households. We have more than 800,000 PRH units, and they have to be maintained. And then we are going to expect another 300,000 PRH units to be completed. So I support the rent review proposal, which is the result of the review mechanism. And also measures have been implemented to help the needy. For example, CSSA households, their rent is paid by the government, and actually there's going to be a waiver for a few months for all tenants. So I believe the government has considered the case very comprehensively. So I support the proposals. But I would take this opportunity to raise two more points. First, the mechanism would involve the calculation of the income index, whether it's an increase or a decrease. We need a mechanism. We need to rely on a mechanism. But the mechanism has been around for so long. Would there be a need to optimize the mechanism? So I will propose a review to be conducted now. You talk about the medium levels. In 2023, it's $30,000. But it varies according to districts. Central Western, 42,000. Guntong, 30,000. So there are regional differences. And now you just take the average. And also the rent index would apply up to 10% for all PRH households throughout Hong Kong. Is it reasonable? And the rent index will only just consider the change in income level, but not inflation. So I hope a review can be conducted timely. And also, can the government do some coordination to make sure that the increases of different services would not be implemented at the same time? For example, can you consider providing a suitable separation between the price increases and rent increases? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. So. I've heard from members that you are concerned about the financial viability of the HA and that there's a need to maintain financial balance. So your comments are noted. Secondly, how do we get information or statistics on income? Maybe I can ask the Permanent Secretary to explain further. Chairman, yes. When we do the sampling, as Mr. So has indicated, we have taken into account the differences in all the 18 districts. First of all, we look at the household sizes. It's not a random exercise. We look at the population, the 1P, 2P households in our PRH, and then the sampling will be done to reflect the pattern. And then we'll take into account the change in income of such tenants. And also, we look at the districts of our public housing estates. For example, in Ablay Chow Estate, 4,300 units, or 0.5% of the PRH stock in Hong Kong. And so we take a sample of 135 PRH units, or 0.5% of the total. So that it's not something that we done indiscriminately without regard to differences in the district. Mr. Chan Hock Fung, I've been informed by some members that they have certain views. Well, you conduct a review every 2 years, but the rent increase will be implemented in one go. Can you do this in phases? For example, 5% 1 year in 1 year, and then another 5% the following year. That will affect their affordability. And it will also be fairer, at least the perception is that it's fairer, because you conduct a review every 2 years, so you should implement the increase in 2 years. you have more than 800,000 PRH units, and another 300,000 will be coming, so it will be more than 1 million in total. You are now subject to a financial deficit, and the deficit is going to be bigger. With the aging housing stock, the maintenance cost is going to rise. I've actually proposed a motion for the reintroduction of the TPS scheme, tenant purchase scheme, so that the tenants can purchase their own units, and at the same time, the HA's cost on management will be reduced. It's a win-win situation for both. So I just don't understand why the HA is so reluctant, so adamant in refusing to reintroduce the tenant purchase scheme, because you are going to show the heavier and heavier financial burden with more than 1 million PRH units under your management. If the tenants purchase their own units, they will be responsible for the maintenance of the units, and the HA will see the maintenance costs reduce. Would you reconsider this idea?
Well, this is not exactly relevant, but I'll see if the Secretary wants to respond to this. Thank you. I will give a brief response. Regarding the mechanism to have a review conducted every 2 years, it is because we need to conduct monthly sampling of 2,000 households. So in total, 24,000 households would be sampled. We need to sample such data, and we don't want to cause that much of a nuisance for households. Regarding TPS, often we have to think about which housing estates to do such arrangements. If the estate is too old, we need to refurbish the estate first. If it is too new, if we sell it, we would have a high ratio of aged public housing estates on our hand. This is not exactly what we want either. So we need to select some suitable housing estates for TPS. Chair, I would like to clarify something. I think the Secretary misunderstood me. I'm not asking the Housing Authority not to conduct a review every 2 years. I'm just saying perhaps the increase can be spread over 2 years. I also want to say this for TPS. Those housing estates of age 20 to 30 would be best, and I have advocated for such before. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you. Whether the increase should be spread over 2 years. So there would at least be 1 year that does not have any change. I think strategically it may seem different, but I think people have got used to the fact that there is 1 year where there's no change at all, and the other year they would have an increase in rent. Thank you. Mr. Gary Zhang, we talked a lot about affordability. If we consider the policy intent of providing public housing, is that we want people to be able to save up while living in PRH flats, and thus it would be a path to upward mobility. So I want to ask if there is any change in tenants' disposable income. Do you have any figures on this? I actually would have some crude calculations according to the government and specifically the CNSD's figures. In the past 10 years, public housing rent has increased for approximately 40%. If we consider other household expenditure, well, excluding accommodation, for disposable income, that would essentially be that. It would be approximately 50% to 60%. So it seems that the increase in disposable income is slightly higher than the increase in rent. So I am somewhat relieved because it's not the case that people cannot save any money with the increase in rent. So these are just my crude calculations. I just want to know if the administration has some more detailed figures, or will you conduct analyses in future and share with us your findings? Thank you. Secretary, thank you. Chair, thank you. Mr. Gary Zheng, for your perspective. Ms. Yuan, in her presentation, mentioned that the cumulative increase in household income is 131%, whereas the cumulative increase in rent would be 87%. So there is a 44% difference. It may sound different from Mr. Zheng's calculations, but I guess it would act as some sort of reference for Mr. Zheng. I think the Permanent Secretary has something to share. Thank you. We will review your suggestion, but we also have some figures to share. For tenants' average income and the ratio to average household income, it would be 9.7%. According to RVD's figures, it would be 30%, Rating and Valuation Department's figures. So if we are talking about public housing rental, it would only account for 9.7%, whereas in the private sector, it would account for 30%. It seems that people would have a higher percentage of disposable income while they're living in public housing. I think the administration can share with us more figures like these. With you have provided such figures, it should allay the concerns of members in relation to whether the increase in rent would cause people to not be able to cover their daily living expenses. Thank you. I can see that Mr. Lemon Kwong has pressed the request to speak button to speak for the second time. I do not see other members pressing the request to speak button, so I will end the discussion of this item after Mr. Lemon Kwong speaks. Mr. Lemon Kwong, thank you. I have a very simple question. I just want to know if there is any support to help those who would have temporary financial difficulties apart from the RAS. Secretary, excuse me, I did write your question, but I forgot to answer it. I apologize. Thank you. The RS would provide support to tenants with temporary financial difficulties. For the operational details or any suggestions on such, we would welcome members to give us such suggestions. Permanent Secretary has something to add. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lemon Kwong mentioned in general a 3-month income proof would be necessary for RAS. But for emergency cases, for example, the breadwinner was suddenly injured or sick and could not work, we would have some sort of concessions where we would only want to get 1 month's income proof. We will of course require perhaps other proof, but there is room for discretion. That's what I want to say. We will also enhance publicity on this. During the pandemic, we had 25,000 households that were receiving rent reductions in 2022. After the pandemic, we have, at the end of March this year, about 22,400 households receiving rent reduction under the scheme. So they have the support of the RAS, but again, we would welcome anyone with any need for assistance to seek help from estate managers if necessary. Thank you. We will now move on to the next agenda item. Thank you, public officers, for attending this item. Agenda item number 4. Performance of the environmental targets and initiatives of the Hong Kong Housing Authority in 2023-24. Public officers in attendance for this item would be Mr. Daniel Leung, Deputy Director of Housing Development and Construction Housing Department, Mr. Dominic Wong, Assistant Director, Project 1 Housing Department, Ms. Hamida Haroon, Assistant Director, Estate Management 1 Housing Department, and their teams. Welcome, public officers in attendance. I will now ask the relevant representatives of the administration to brief members on the paper. Thank you. Good afternoon, members. In respect of the Housing Authority's environmental targets and initiatives in 2023 and 24, we have met all relevant targets. I'll now ask Mr. Dominic Wong to give a short presentation on our report. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. We have all along been promoting green and sustainable development in housing, and we have been promoting on multiple fronts: planning and construction of new public housing, operation of existing estates, and housing authorities' offices at work to promote such environmental targets and initiatives. We have 6 aspects of targets, including energy efficiency, water conservation, greening, waste management, control of hazardous materials, as well as enhancement of environmental awareness and participation in environmental protection initiatives. First, on energy efficiency. For new public housing, the building services installations, the design average energy consumption is set as not exceeding 23.5 kilowatt per hour per square meter per annum. We have also made use of LED lighting as well as grid-connected photovoltaic systems. Since 2011, we have installed the relevant system in 155 new domestic blocks. We will continue to install the relevant system in new public rental housing projects. For EVs, for new and existing housing estates, we'll continue to promote the use of EVs. As at March 2024, we have in around 100 car parks at about 2,330 private car parking spaces provided EV chargers. We will plan for the expansion of the provision of EV charging facilities in HA's car parks in phases. By the end of 2024, we will have about 3,000 medium charging facilities completed. We will also have about 2,000 medium charging facilities installed in new public housing projects annually in future in new housing estates. We have also made carbon emission estimation and energy estimation. In 14 existing typical PRH blocks, we have conducted carbon audits to monitor carbon emissions. We will also make use of green construction materials and green construction methods such as MIC modular integrated construction, MIMEP multi-trade integrated mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and implemented green procurement. On water conservation, we have minimized consumption of irrigation water. We have provided in new public housing projects zero irrigation system or other types of irrigation systems. On greening, for all new public housing projects, we would have achieved at least 20% green coverage. In existing estates, we would conduct landscape improvement works to select more suitable plant species to match the local landscape and environment for plant growth. We will continue to carry out landscape improvement works in about 20 selected PRH estates. In 2023-24, we held a total of 4 rounds of activities under the Action Seedling Program. This program would have seeds or pot plants distributed to local residents or community members, and these seedlings will be transplanted to the planting areas of the completed estates.
We've also introduced community planting areas or garden for community participation in all new PRH projects. And also we are going to organize community garden activities, greening promotion activities, including tree planting days, and also to carry out greening treatment on all newly formed slopes. In the year, we have already covered 10 such slopes, such as hydro seeding, stone pitching, and tall planting. In the coming years, we will select about 10 slopes for greening treatment every year. Number 4, waste management. In new housing estates, we continue to use green materials and components such as pulverized fuel ash, ground granulated blast furnace slag, recycled rock fuel, and also for woodwork, we use softwood from sustainable forest sources across the board for timber doors in HA's new housing projects. And in management, we will continue to implement the program on source separation of domestic waste, and we also set up collect points to collect domestic recyclables through an incentive scheme. To promote PRH residents' awareness of waste separation as source and clean cycling, we will complement government's policy for municipal solid waste. We will organize different activities with the EPD to promote recycling. And at our PRH, we will have more food waste smart recycling bins installed. Next, control of hazardous material. We will carry out proper procedure to remove asbestos in demolishing existing buildings. We implemented the asbestos management plan to manage and monitor asbestos-containing material, so as to protect the health of workers and residents. Number 6, enhancement of environmental awareness. In all our contracts, we will enhance the environmental performance of contractors. We require them to submit and implement environmental management teams to use economic environment-friendly equipment and machinery and methods. We'll conduct a biennial survey in order to understand and assess the environmental awareness of PRH residents. In the survey conducted in 2023, about 70% of PRH households did separate household waste for recycling, and some 90% of them would dispose of recyclable waste in the recycling bins, and 61% of PRH households were satisfied with the performance of environmental work in housing estates. We also work with other organizations to promote the awareness. We will conduct different publicity. For example, we would use various channels to have a designated eco corner, and also we have information on different initiatives such as the amount of waste to be recycled, and the waste reduction bead and slim rubbish bin initiatives implemented in 14 estates. We will continue to enhance PRH awareness in our initiative, and we have organized the domestic recyclable claim plane and mooncake box recycling campaign in our PRH estates. We also conducted a food waste recycling pilot scheme in our markets. And the reverse vending, the green collect scheme, and also the reverse vending scheme for recycling of plastic waste. Our office will also carry out different activities such as promotion of waste consumption reduction and paper consumption reduction. In the year, each staff consumed an average of 3,188 kilowatt per hour of electricity, meeting the target of not more than 3,400 kWh. We have taken practical measures to measure the achievement in 2024 and 2025. We'll continue to implement various targets and initiatives to complement government's carbon reduction strategy and implement our environmental protection initiative. Thank you, Assistant Director. The floor is now open for members to raise questions. 6 questions have indicated that they would like to raise questions. Michael Tin, Lo Guokfan, Liang Wenwang, Dr. Wendy Hong, Dr. So Cheng-Wing, and Wenson Chang, Deputy Chairman. Mr. Michael Tin, on the question of environmental protection, I think it's a pity that we have missed a milestone in environmental protection this year. We were about to implement the municipal waste charging scheme, but because of the problem in the community, we have to give it a miss, which is regrettable. On the one hand, we want to have a new style quality productivity. But at the same time, we are not doing enough for the recycling of food waste, which account for 40% of municipal solid waste. And now we want to introduce new green technology to implement food waste recycling in public housing estates. The department talked about the bin, the recycling bins, which is the old-style productivity initiatives. So I just want to give you a reminder, this may not be in line with the new productivity that we're talking about. We have 213 housing estates with EV charging facilities. Well, I raised a question at the council meeting, but the president said I was digressing. So I now put a very concrete and specific question to you. If the EPD is telling you that they have the machines, the food waste recycling equipment, are you going to provide a space equivalent to 2 car park spaces to implement this in every housing estate? Do you have a timetable? If the answer is yes. So if you have food waste bin, and in the past, the bins may overflow, but the new recycling machine would liquefy the food waste after people have deposited the food waste. So if the rate of processing is quicker than the amount deposited, there will be no hygiene problems created. This would be the ideal solution. We have gone to Tai Po to see a demonstration. Everyone applauded. And now you are still doing this in the form of food waste recycling bins. So my question is, can you identify a space equivalent to 2 car parking spaces in every housing estate? Because the CE has been talking about the new productivity that we would like to promote. Isn't this exactly what he's talking about? Well, I'll ask Mr. Harloon to talk about this. Ms. Harloon. We have a close cooperation with the EPD. We are aware of the new technology to handle food waste. As for these complementary measures to do this, for example, the processing machine, it will require water supply. What we're doing with the EPD is that we hope that in every block of our housing estate, we will have one food waste recycling bins for residents so that they can earn green points, green dollars. And also for the food trash transformator, we would do it with EPD. Well, I'm just talking about the space of 2 car park spaces, and this is new productivity. We are told that it will require a space equivalent to 2 car parking spaces. So how long will your study take? If this is the way we promote new productivity, how long have we have to wait? Well, perhaps you can give them some time to reply. You have already got the new inventions. The question is, how long can you really apply the technology? In the old Park 2 scheme, there is a similar technology in use. So we will tie in with the EPD. Are you talking about the bins is part of the new productivity drive? Well, it will be supported by some technology of OPAC 2 to produce compost and energy. I'm talking about the collection and dispose of the disposed food waste. The bins are the old style equipment. Why don't you do something in response to the CE's initiative? We have been in relation with EPD. I think that's all what they can offer at this point. So there will be studies followed by more studies. Your time is up. If you want to raise additional questions, please queue up. Next, we have Mr. Lau Kwok Fun. I'm grateful to the Housing Department for briefing us on the performance of the housing targets in their estates. It's easier for new housing estates because you can incorporate the green designs. But I know you have also done something for older estates. So on top of environmental targets, you would also need to upgrade the facilities. And there's a common problem here. You want to introduce more facilities, but there are constraints. For example, photovoltaic panels. If you want to install a panel as a canopy for car parking spaces, it will be energy efficient. But the canopy will be taken into account in the floor area. So sometimes you are prevented from doing this. So perhaps you can get some waiver for such green facilities in the housing estate. Thank you for your question. I will defer to Ms. Haloon for these questions. As for the installation of photovoltaic panels in old estates, and the exemption with regard to GFA may not be possible, but there are different technology available. Some photovoltaic panels can be installed without the need of having additional GFA. That's the direction we move. Perhaps you can coordinate with other departments to do more. For example, cover provided in the form of a photovoltaic panel, or also green corridors or covered walkway. You should encourage more people to do this, or more estates to do this, by getting a waiver, so that you can do more. So it's better than twinkling around the system. So perhaps you can present this as a planning game in the design of new estates. But what about older estates? Can something be done?
多謝劉。
Yes. Assistant Director. Thank you. We have been working with the Housing Authority. And I think that is the direction we have to take for future green building projects. We will continue to review with the relevant departments to see if it is possible. Thank you. In future, not only the housing department, we want to make sure we have 100% GFA even for such facilities. So they should be excluded from the calculations. Thank you. Mr. Lam and Kwong. Thank you. I recognize the efforts of the administration so far in relation to environmental targets and publicity initiatives, because those have really enhanced awareness of residents in relation to green initiatives. But I do note two issues with the greening of housing estates. When there is population intake of new housing estates with the sinks and the cooking benches, people don't like them, so they would just remove them, and it's such a waste of resources. I understand that you have implemented a design for cooking benches for people to adjust heights, but then we have noted that during population intake of a housing project recently, we do still see people disposing of such facilities. Would you try to get feedback from the residents to see why they are discarding such facilities? Once you've gauged their feedback, we do want to minimize waste. Or is it possible to recycle the facilities even if the residents don't find such facilities to be suitable for them? Perhaps these can be reused if some residents' facilities are broken and they can have such replace their broken facilities. I want to ask other environmental initiatives that would involve the residents. For example, community planting areas. Not all estates have community planting areas. Would you be able to expand such to other estates that do not have community planting areas at the moment? Thank you. Deputy Director. Thank you. In general, we do not have much fitting out works done. We have adopted an approach of having a design that is fit for purpose and has no frills. For example, for cooking benches, sinks, these are required when there is an intake by law. We have actually some surveys for new residents that would ask them how we can improve in terms of our design. Recently, we do see people having heightened awareness in relation to environmental protection. We have seen less such disposal of household facilities. We have also implemented, as the member mentioned, an adjustable cooking bench design. We'll see in future what we can improve on. In relation to community planting areas, in general, for new PRH projects with an area larger than 2 hectares, we will have an area that is approximately 200 to 300 square meters for community planting areas. It is an area that is not exactly small, so we can only do such for larger PRH projects. Thank you. Dr. Wendy Hong. I have 2 questions that I have actually asked before. I just want to follow up on the questions now to get more detailed answers. A colleague asked about the use of solar energy. We do want to use more renewable energy, and in fact, in the policy address, it was mentioned that we should have more renewable energy used. And in fact, before, it was raised in 2009 that we should have more grid-connected photovoltaic systems. But we only have 155 out of 1,000 domestic blocks that have photovoltaic systems. That is just 15.5%. In fact, in Singapore, for 10 years, the coverage has reached 40%. So we have much room in improvement. We should have organizations work with housing authority to install more solar panels, and these companies are willing to provide free maintenance. And in fact, if these are grid connected, power companies can refund residents in relation to the electricity or power generated. I now want to ask about food waste recycling. In 200 odd estates, food waste recycling bins have been installed, so they have achieved their goal early. I appreciate that. But we need to make sure contractors will convey these food waste to OPAC as stated. In fact, we can perhaps install GPS devices on the food waste collection trucks to see whether such food waste is transported to OPAC. We can perhaps also put in QR codes on trucks for people to track the amount of food waste collected by each truck. I want to ask if any monitoring is imposed on contractors' food waste collection. Thank you. Deputy Director. Thank you. I have some figures to share with you in relation to the installation of photovoltaic panels. Indeed, since 2011, we have installed the relevant system in 155 new domestic blocks. Our expectation is that it would provide not less than 1.5% of electricity used in communal areas. We have installed the system in 155 new domestic blocks, But for new housing projects, there are still some constraints. We need to make sure there's enough floor space for the installation of such systems. Also, if there is overshadowing of the space, it is not efficient to install such systems. So we need to carefully consider where to put in such systems. For existing estates, I'll perhaps let Ms. Haroon answer that. Thank you. For existing estates, it's actually similar the situation. We have installed in 30-odd housing estates such systems. We have also introduced some flexible photovoltaic systems because they would have less constraints in terms of technology. We will see better where we can put such systems in future. Will you consider PPP? Thank you. We do not rule out such possibility, and we are open to any discussions, but we do not have any plans for implementation at the moment. Food waste monitoring for food waste collection. Thank you. In relation to food waste recycling, we practice division of labor with the EPD. The EPD's contractor would install food waste smart recycling bins in estates, and our cleansing workers, once notified by the EPD, would replace the contents of the bins, and at approximately 70% full, cleansing workers will clean out the contents of the recycling bins, and after clearing out the contents every day, EPD's contractor would have their transportation team collect the food waste and transport them to OPAC 2. So the transportation between the housing estate and OPAC 2 would be the responsibility of the EPD. Thank you. It's now my turn to speak. I would like to express my appreciation of the government's efforts. I would like to talk about Green Ed Community in particular. I understand that in different districts there are outlets of Green Ed Community, and we should have an increasing number of outlets in future. But I have noted that for some Green Ed Community outlets, they are larger. They would have shop fronts, and then at the back they would have some processing facilities, and then the waste would be transported to other perhaps processing plants. But then for some smaller housing estates, they do not have space for such facilities, and that would require more frequent transportation of such waste or recyclables. I actually noted that green community facilities are really popular in certain housing estates. In order to promote the initiative to go green, we should not have such frequent transportation. Would it be possible for the Housing Bureau to give more space to greener community facilities? Or do you have any plans that would incorporate the future development of green community? Thank you. I'll let Ms. Haroon answer the questions. Thank you. The Housing Bureau and the Housing Department have many environmental initiatives, such as what we mentioned earlier in relation to food waste recycling bins, as well as other recycling facilities, as well as green at community outlets. Of course, we understand that green at community outlets are very popular among residents, but we need to make sure there is enough space and that it would still be the fact that there would be clear passageways, and we need to minimize nuisance caused to neighboring facilities as well. We will try to look for more space to put in recycling facilities. In new public housing projects, we would draw reference from the experience in existing housing projects to see what we can do better. We do face certain constraints with existing housing projects. I would hope the member would understand that. Thank you. Thank you. I do understand that you face difficulties with existing housing estates. I just want to make sure you would reserve enough space in new public housing projects. If you have many trucks going in and out, for example, them coming back in 3 to 4 hours, it will still be a nuisance and it's not exactly environmentally friendly. Thank you. Mr. Tonite. Thank you. I speak in support of the Housing Authority's work in 2023-24 in respect of its environmental targets and initiatives. The 6 areas covered, they cover a lot of areas. I want to know more about the initiatives for energy efficiency. Dr. Wendy Hong asked about this. She asked whether we can do more in this, and the administration explained their factors for consideration in relation to photovoltaic systems. I want to focus on carbon emissions. You said you have conducted audits, and audits were conducted only in 14 existing typical PRH blocks for monitoring carbon emissions. Why can't you expand the scale of audits? You should involve more people so that people would have heightened awareness.
And the initiative will be implemented in other housing estates. Do you have concrete plans on this? It seems that you just cover 14, which is a small number. And I'm also concerned about greening, especially slopes and greening treatment. Well, the problem is it will look nice when it's just completed, but what about subsequent maintenance and the cost? It seems that the efforts would taper off over the long term. So can you give us more information? And also on management, waste management and recycling. You have a reward scheme. Small gifts will be given for participants. And do you have regular publication of achievers of estates with good performance, so that they are proud of themselves and that they are among the best in performance among so many housing estates? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your questions. Carbon audit, as the paper indicates, will cover a commercial center and 14 different types of housing estate, which will cover some 80%, more than 80% of different public housing estates. So they are representative of public housing estates. We've collected data, and over the years, the achievement has been quite good. On average, we have seen a reduction of 27% of carbon emission. So that's the findings of our audit. So the measures will be implemented in other housing estates, similar housing estates, because they represent 80% of our housing stock. On the greening of slope, it's not that we would just do the greening and then next year when the vegetation withers, we would just leave them alone. Well, there will be maintenance to ensure that the greening is maintained. And then I would like to ask Ms. Harun to take the question on recycling. Thank you for your questions. In the housing estates, we have different schemes for waste reduction, sorting of waste at source, and initiative, and slim rubbish bin, waste reduction B, the initiative, and also some schemes to collect mooncake containers. And we also have different activities to promote awareness among PRH residents. And we are also going to have more one-stop recycling service, Green Collect, and increase the number of collection points. Chairman, I just want them to comment, to give some recognition to housing estates which are performing in waste reduction. Well, in our newsletter, in our publicity material, we'll share their success stories. So for measures which are more effective and achieve good results, we would give them some publicity so that more can follow the examples. Dr. Junis Ho, I'm concerned about energy efficiency and greening, as well as EV charging facilities. Well, less than half of car parking spaces under the HA's management has EV facilities, and they are managing 3,360. And then there will be another additional 7,000 parking spaces equipped with EV chargers. As at the end of 2024, there will be 3,000 medium charging facilities by the end of 2024, and then another 2,000 by 2025. The government is providing a subsidy of more than $2 billion to private housing estates for the installation of EV chargers, because we are seeing a growing fleet of EVs in Hong Kong. And the HA has more than 30,000 car parking spaces, and less than half are installed with chargers. So the provision is not going to meet the demand in the future. Can you do more than what you have indicated in the PowerPoint? 2,000 facilities by 2025. Can you be more progressive to achieve a better level? Thank you for your question on EVs. In our housing estates, existing estates, we have to consider the constraints, because we can only do so if it's technically feasible in the provision of EV chargers. In the PowerPoint, we talk about different measures to increase the number of EV charging facilities. In the new housing estates, there will be more. For 2024 to 2025, 26, 27. By 2026-27, we're going to have 6,600 EV charging facilities for private cars and in our housing estates, and motorcycles and light goods vehicles. There will be medium charging facilities. If there are more than 100 car parking spaces, we're going to provide 2 medium charging facilities. The power consumption in existing estates is already very high, So if feasible, we would roll out more plans to provide EV charging facilities according to the roadmap. So you're going to provide such facilities in new housing estates. What about existing housing estates? You talk about the power consumption levels are high. So are you saying that the power provision does not allow you to do more? You have 2,600, another 6,000 will be coming on stream. Do you have a KPI for each and every housing estate on the extent of the increase in EV charges? I would like to ask Mr. Haroon to talk about existing housing estates. Well, with the EVs becoming more and more popular, the HA has been doing something to increase EV charging facilities in existing car parks. But we have to consider the overall situation with building services, especially the existing power consumption levels. As for the future targets, we have already mentioned that in phases, we'll provide 5,000 additional medium charging facilities in our car parks. And the works have already gradually commenced. By the end of 2024, 3,000 medium charging facilities will be completed, and our target is to provide another or upgrade the existing infrastructure of another 2,000 medium charging facilities by 2025. We will pay attention to the developing technology to see whether there's a room to further increase the number of EV charging facilities. So we actively consider the provision of more. All right. So members have completed the first round of questions. Anyone for the second round? If not, then that wraps up this item. Moving on, AOB. Members, this panel will, on the 21st of July, this Sunday, conduct a duty visit to the Samjan on the use of projects with MIC systems and also the well-being design of housing. If there's no further comment, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.